Content warning, this episode contains discussion of murder. So way back in February of 2019, I was growing frustrated with the Indiana State Police holding back their investigative files on the Burger Chef case, and it occurred to me that perhaps I could get the investigative files of another agency that worked on the case, which was the FBI. So at that time, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the FBI requesting those files. Unbeknownst to me, a couple of weeks after I made that request, another podcaster named Chris Davis, who had no knowledge of what I had done, he had the same idea that I did. And he also filed this same request to get these documents from the FBI. As I said, he and I did this separately, but we did it in the early spring of 2019. It is now August of 2023, and we only just received the documents, and a couple of weeks after they were given to Chris and myself, they were subsequently put by the FBI on their website. So these documents are now available for everyone to see. There's a few hundred pages of them. So we thought we would take a moment we'll give you a brief recap of the case. Then we're going to talk about just a few of the many things in these files that jump out to us. Some stuff about another potential person that people have been interested in looking at over the years. But we'll begin with the movements of a particular car.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases.
We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is, you never can forget, car trouble. Let's start out by talking about just the basic facts of the case.
Yes, and if you want to listen to our previous coverage of the Burger Chef murders, if you go back through our catalog, there are all the episodes titled You Never Can Forget. That's a reference to one of Burger Chef's jingles. This is a fast food restaurant chain that was based in Indianapolis and is now defunct. But basically, it's a very complicated and upsetting case, essentially an unsolved mass homicide / kidnapping.
On a November night in 1978, an employee of the Speedway, Indiana Burger Chef named Brian Kring stops by the restaurant sometime not long after midnight. He sees the back door open. He goes inside. All the employees that should have been there are gone. There's no trace of them and no indication of where they went. A few hours later, a car belonging to the manager of the restaurant is discovered. It's discovered a short distance away on a street, oddly enough, not far from a police station.
And that police station was, of course, the police station in Speedway, Indiana. That is a town on the border of Indianapolis on the west side. It's its own town, though. It's its own city. The police there who end up responding to the call about, hey, all our employees are missing at this place, decide that the employees likely went to go partying and stole money from the registers to do so, even though none of them have a record. And that doesn't make any sense. The four missing are 20-year-old Jane Freet, 17-year-old Ruth Shelton, and two 16-year-old boys named Danny Davis and Mark Flemons.
Their bodies are discovered a couple of days later, I think about 20 miles away in a more rural area.
On the south side of Indianapolis.
And so we're going to start our discussion today by talking about Jane's car. As we say, Jane's car was discovered a short distance away from the restaurant, like 1.5 miles from the restaurant, near a police station.
Yeah, off a park. And that's one of the most baffling aspects of this case. What happened with that? Were the victims transported in the car to a second vehicle? Was the car moved after the abduction and murder? Like, why?
And we will note that when Jane's body is discovered, the key to her car is in her coat pocket.
Yes, and in case you're wondering, well, perhaps the kidnappers and murderers forced them all into this Vega, which would have been a tight squeeze, and drove them to the murder site, and then after murdering them, drove them back. No. And there's a reason why we know that that is actually not the scenario that happened.
What is that reason?
Well, but shortly before her murder, Jane happened to take her Vega to the mechanic to get it worked on, and the mileage on her odometer was recorded. So when police eventually look at that, they determine that there's not enough, that's not accounted for. There's not, like, a trip to Greenwood or a trip to the south side and back is not accounted for in the mileage.
So the question becomes, how and when does the car get moved? And what role does this play in what happened that night? As we said, the fact that the employees are missing is discovered a little after midnight. So what time was the car gone? There's some information pertaining to that in these files. We're going to read some of this to you now. Some information in these files has been redacted.
Yes. And we should also note before we get too into this that the FBI's role in this case was very minor. But as we've seen from the scope of documents they provided us, certainly they did a lot of work in the short time they worked this case. But basically, if you're wondering why is the FBI involved, well, missing employees. This is an abduction that at this point may have crossed state lines. So they're brought in to help deal with that. When their bodies are found in Indiana, it's no longer an FBI case. So they're gone.
They're out of the case.
So they work a few days doing legwork, talking to people. And that's what we received. This very early days, first things first, essentially from the FBI. We'll just say redacted whenever there's a redacted word or phrase. Sorry if that's confusing, but that's the best way we could think of to do this, because there's a lot of redactions in these documents.
So with that in mind, let's start finding out what these documents have to say about Jane's car.
Redacted advised that they had received some information that assistant manager Jane's car was gone from the Burger Chef parking lot approximately 11:30 p.m. on November 17th, 1978, which was noticed by the redacted, who is a friend of Jane's.
Okay, so we have information or testimony or statement that the car is not there at 11:30.
So that's from one of Jane's friends who notices this.
Let's see what else there is in these files. Redacted stated that shortly thereafter, Redacted requested him to determine the time, inasmuch as she was expecting her father to pick them up, and continued that he proceeded to the front of the Dunkin' Donuts restaurant and determined the time to be 11:30 p.m. Redacted advised that he recalled when he and Redacted passed around the side of the Burger Chef following their confrontation with the individuals. He observed a white Vega with a stripe thereon parked in the side parking lot of the Burger Chef restaurant. Okay, so far we have 11:30 the car is not there, and 11:30 the car is there.
We actually, despite the redactions, given the amount of reporting we've done on this, are able to identify some people, witnesses who've come up in the case again and again. So this portion is referring to Mary Ryan and George Nichols. We've had them on the show before. We've talked to them. The individuals referenced here are what Mary and George describe as two white men who approached them on the railroad tracks where they were hanging out there around the time of the abductions, who basically said some strange things about vandalism, and it was an uncomfortable interaction.
But the main thing right now that I want people to take away is at 11:30, they say the car is there.
Right.
Despite the earlier statement that the car is not there at 11:30.
Yes.
I'm now going to read from another statement. I'm going to cut a bunch out of this and just emphasize the part about the car. At approximately 11:55, he departed the Galaxy Disco and was walking towards the Burger Chef restaurant. Redacted stated that the Burger Chef parking lot was empty except for Jane Freed's car and a Ford Pinto station wagon. So now we have the car in the lot almost right up to midnight.
And this is from Kirk Thompson, another witness who we've interviewed on the show. He's a friend of Mark Fleming's who is going to walk his friend home, shows up at the Burger Chef. He says, no one's there. And he kind of gets out of there at that point.
So this story has the people have been kidnapped from the Burger Chef. Jane's car is still there.
Yeah. So the car is coming and going almost in people's minds. And it really is baffling. And one thing that's frustrating is that I think if we could figure out what happened with the car, we might actually have a better sense of what happened with the crime.
Why don't you read the last passage we found about the car?
Redacted was interviewed in the presence of auxiliary police detective, Redacted, and his parents, Redacted. Redacted advised that he returned home at 1 a.m. on November 18th, 1978, from visiting his girlfriend. He stated he drove down the street from the west end of the block and went directly in front of where Jane Freed's car was parked. He stated that at 1 a.m., when he came home, the only car on the street belonged to their neighbors named Redacted. It was a white Plymouth. Redacted stated that at approximately 1:30 a.m., he heard one noise that sounded as if a trash can were being knocked over or perhaps a car door being closed. He stated that he did not see or hear anything else during the course of the evening.
Okay, so except for that one stray report we have of the car being gone at 11:30, everyone else is placing the car in the restaurant parking lot, even after the time the 4 victims have been abducted. And now we have a person saying the car was not where it was later discovered at 1 a.m. It wasn't placed there until perhaps as late as 1:30 a.m. So what does this mean?
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, if you're trying, can I just say that this is the perennial problem with the Burger Chef murders case, is that, like, there's so much information that's contradictory that it's kind of hard to, like, the waters are so murky, you really can't see the bottom or what's in there. And if I'm trying to make it all work, which I don't necessarily think is, like, what happened, it's just more of, like, it trying to make it all fit together. Jane leaves in her car, gets basically forced back to the restaurant, and then the car is removed later on and parked on that street where it was later discovered later, in the early morning of the next day.
But we had to come back to the issue of the key.
Right.
The key to the car is in Jane's coat. And obviously it wouldn't make sense for the people to drive the victims all the way away to where they were killed, take the key from Jane, go all the way back up to Speedway, move the car, and then drive back to the crime scene. Does this suggest that the 4 were still alive as late as 1:30 a.m. and still being moved about the Speedway area for some unknown reason?
Unclear. What do you think? What's the most linear explanation or linear scenario that this information conjures for you about the car and its movements?
It confuses me.
It's really confusing.
It makes me think either the 4 victims were alive and being moved about Speedway, as I indicated, for reasons we can't fathom, and I'd hate to think what they went through during that time. Or it raises the possibility, do we know if there were other keys to the car? And could someone associated with the crime have access to a second set of keys?
Right. Now,
because that would make things a lot simpler, because then the 4 victims could have been immediately transported down to the crime scene and killed. And then whoever had that other set of keys could have said, we don't want the car to be right there in the lot. That's going to attract too much attention.
Well, and let's talk about some context here that I think is important. The Burger Chef restaurant, this is a Friday night in November. It closed at 11 p.m. and it could take as much as 2 hours to clean up, close everything. So, it could be a late night for people. But essentially, one thing that would be noticeable are if the lights are on and the manager's car is gone, that doesn't look right to anybody because wait, why are things not shut up? So that's one weird thing that, like, if they were trying to make it so that no one was going to come and investigate, why not turn the lights off? I think that would be, I don't know. Or either leave the car and leave the lights on because maybe they're still cleaning, or I don't know. We're reading a lot of rationale into this that maybe actually didn't exist in real life. I want to throw one thing out there. We know witness statements can often be very muddled and confused, and that is absolutely not knocking anybody who provided a witness statement here, but human beings are fallible. If you've ever been at some sort of law enforcement exercise, sometimes they do this with high school students, you've been in a, like, there's like exercises that are done where some guy comes in and then immediately leaves, and then you get asked, what color shirt was he wearing? What color were his eyes? What did he say? And you'll get like a whole range of statements, and a lot of them may be inaccurate. Maybe some things will be generally accurate, but then people don't remember the little details. So I'm saying when you have a bunch of people driving around on a Friday night seeing things, it's possible to get stuff wrong, and we can't put too much on witness statements.
We are so grateful to our wonderful sponsor, Brilliant Earth. Brilliant Earth is all about gorgeous fine jewelry and a strong commitment to ethical business practices in the diamond industry.
As a married couple, Kevin and I understand how a special ring can serve as a token of love. And Brilliant Earth creates some of the most beautiful engagement rings and wedding bands out there to celebrate your unique love story. Check out their website and customize the ring that you and your partner will love forever. They have all sorts of wonderful styles, like elegant solitaires or free-spirited willows. But you can also completely customize your ring, imbuing it with your own personality.
No one wants to have their special wedding or engagement ring tainted by worries over unethical diamond sourcing. What really shines for us about Brilliant Earth is their commitment to ethical sourcing and sustainability. That level of focus is an absolute rarity in the jewelry business. It makes us feel like we're supporting a brand that really cares about making the world a better place.
Now, Brilliant Earth only works with beyond conflict-free diamonds. That means they exclusively work with partners who follow the strictest international labor, trade, and environmental standards. So you know that they are committed to ensuring safe working conditions and a spirit of sustainability.
Check out all of their beautiful pieces at brilliantearth.com. That's brilliantearth.com. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp.
We're grateful for our wonderful sponsor, BetterHelp. Kevin and I are night owls, and we often take that to extremes. Even though we know getting plenty of rest is good for our minds and bodies, sometimes we have trouble settling down, and we'll end up staying up way too late as a result. Sometimes it feels like our restless minds are actively sabotaging us. We know what we have to do, but our brains are getting in their own way.
If you can relate to that, then consider this. Therapy can help us all learn positive coping skills, far more positive than staying up researching random stuff all night. Therapy can really help you figure stuff out, so your brain can work for you instead of against you. It helps you strive to become a better version of yourself.
We'd encourage any of our listeners thinking about trying out therapy to give BetterHelp a try. It's all online. Even if you're super busy, BetterHelp is totally convenient to your schedule. And it's easy to get started. Just fill out a quick questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist.
BetterHelp will help you find the best match, and you can switch therapists whenever you want for no additional charge.
Make your brain your friend with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/murdersheet today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/
murder sheet. So if you could knock any of these witness statements off to make it make more sense, how would that look?
The problem is, what would make it make most sense is the Jane's car, the Vega, is taken from the Burger Chef at the same time the 4 employees are. And presumably this is sometime between 11:30 and 12. Now, the problem is we only have one statement saying the car was gone at 11:30. Other statements are saying it's there after, it's close to, other statements are saying it's there as late as a few minutes before midnight.
One thing that people maybe...
And then we have this statement saying, I was where the car was later found at 1 a.m. The car was found, I believe, around 1 a.m. The car wasn't there.
One thing that people who are listening may be wondering right now is, well, when were they killed? Like, when approximately were they actually murdered after the abduction in the woods in Johnson County, Indiana? And the answer is we don't know an exact time. So ear witnesses say that they heard gunfire in the area where the kids were killed in rural Johnson County around 1:30 a.m. that night. Again, that's not really a hard time, necessarily. Also, we should note that 2 of the victims were shot and 2 were killed in other ways. Jane was stabbed and Mark had some sort of bludgeoning injury that ended up resulting in his death. So a lot of it, it becomes one of those cases that's so hard to map out and kind of walk through what the killers were doing, because there's so much that's just like we can't lock down in terms of details. So if they're killed around 1:30 and then the car is driving up around 1:30, then that really doesn't make any sense.
Well, this resident says he heard a noise around 1:30 that could have been a car door.
Yeah, I guess maybe it wasn't. Maybe it shows up much later in the evening, and he's correct that it wasn't there at 1, but maybe the noise is irrelevant. And I don't know. I mean, I would hate to think that they were being driven around that whole time. It's just awful. It's an awful case. One scenario that always came to mind for me that this kind of blows apart was that they're abducted from the restaurant, forced into Jane's Vega because it's just a convenience measure, and then driven out to where the car is found. The car is abandoned. Jane puts her key in her pocket. They are taken in a secondary vehicle that was parked away, a getaway car, and driven out to where they're killed. This kind of makes it be like, well, that doesn't really make any sense, because that would all be happening, between midnight and 1 a.m. And basically at 1 a.m. we're hearing, no, there's no car there.
So the car is a lot more important than it may seem at first.
Yeah, and I know you probably think, why are they talking about the car so much? I really feel like the car tells us what happened on some level.
Yes.
If we could figure out the car in a way that, like, yes, this makes sense, and this checks all the boxes, I think we can figure out something about what the killers were doing or what they were thinking. Or was this supposed to be a murder? Was this supposed to be a robbery initially? Was there some calculus that changed at some point later in the evening, later in the morning, that resulted in a homicide? If you have thoughts on the car, please let us know. We've been trying to figure this out for years, and now we're just more confused.
Let's move on to another thing that we thought was interesting from these files. And a lot of this stuff now is going to revolve around a specific individual. His name is redacted from the files. We've talked with him in the past. We hope to talk with him in the future and get some of his feedback on some of this information, how it's presented in these files.
Yes, and we'd really love to get the chance to speak with him again and chat before we put his name out there. We certainly want to err on the side of getting information out there. So, we're going to continue to cover these files and go into more and more detail over time. So just keep that in mind.
So let's start talking about this person by reading a little bit from the file. The only trouble at work that Redacted were aware of was an incident involving employees by the names of Redacted and Redacted, who Redacted had caught behind the Burger Chef business and apparently informed the manager about this. So, an employee of the Burger Chef got in trouble for doing something behind the Burger Chef with another employee.
Right.
And this resulted, apparently, in him getting fired.
Yes. And we strongly suspect we know who that is, right?
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Yes. And that's the person we alluded to earlier.
And here's a little bit more about that story from another interview. Redacted added that Redacted, a white male employee, Redacted years of age, was supposed to work from 10 p.m. to closing time that Friday evening, but did not show. Redacted had been in trouble and was fired earlier that week, but had not been advised. Friday night was to be his last night. Redacted lives in Redacted and is a known Redacted.
We're pretty sure it's a known drug dealer.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'll say this. When you look at fast food homicides, Burger Chef is bizarre. Most of them don't involve kidnapping. I can think of two off the top of my head. One is the KFC murders in Kilgore, Texas, and then the other one is the Baskin Robbins murders that was part of the series done by Dennis Reed, a serial killer out of Nashville. So that's a rare thing. Usually employees are killed in the restaurant. But one thing that is a theme in restaurant killings is that it's usually perpetuated. Not usually. There's a sub-genre, so to speak. There's a subcategory, so to speak, of restaurant homicides that are perpetuated by young males who are either aggrieved current or former employees of said fast food restaurant. They clash with their boss. They get fired. They feel disrespected. Then they come back and kill everybody. And that's their response. It's just interesting to think about from the perspective of, I'm not even saying anything about this individual. I am just saying something from the perspective of, if there were work issues, that's something that's going to be very interesting to Kevin and I.
Yes. And the whole incident of he's fired, he may not know he's fired, he's still coming to work even though he's fired.
But he doesn't show up.
That's strange.
It's weird, yeah.
Let's be honest, that's strange.
Let's look into that. And it's like, again, we're not saying anything about any individual. We just want clarification because that's not been communicated to us before. That version of the story that's in the FBI files.
So let's continue and tell a little bit more about this story, and it's about to get a little bit stranger. I'm going to read a statement. This is the name of the person giving the statement is redacted. It's we're very sure that this person is Brian Kring. Brian Kring is an employee of the Burger Chef. He's the one, he's driving by a little after midnight. The lights are on. He thinks his friends are in there. He thinks, well, maybe I'll go in and see if I can help them finish up. So I'm going to read a little bit about it from his statement. Upon approaching the rear entrance, Kring noticed that the door was approximately 3 inches ajar. He then entered the restaurant by the rear door. He found the cash register drawers on the floor and the restaurant safe open. All the bills had been removed from the drawers and only the coins remained. Shortly after he arrived at the restaurant, approximately 2 to 5 minutes, Redacted, another Burger Chef employee, drove up in his father's van-type truck. Kring told Redacted that he thought there had been a robbery. He stated that at that point, Redacted said that he wanted nothing to do with it and left. Kring stated that he felt that it was unusual for Redacted to show up at the restaurant that evening, in that Redacted was scheduled to work 10 p.m. to closing, but did not show up. Kring felt that Redacted would not have wanted Jane Freed, assistant manager, to see him. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't know. It's pretty bizarre.
We have this person who is fired, doesn't show up for work when he's supposed to. He shows up just after this robbery abduction has been discovered and then abruptly leaves.
He's not a model employee if he's being fired. And he's also scheduled to work that night and is therefore showing up extremely late. So it's a bit weird to me I was a lifeguard as a teenager. I never worked fast food. I was a lifeguard. If I blew off one of my lifeguarding shifts, I don't think I'd go to that beach to hang out because I would be scared of getting yelled at. So it's a little bit odd.
And naturally, the FBI was curious about this as well, and they talked to him. So let's hear what he told the FBI.
Redacted advised he is employed at the Burger Chef restaurant located at 5725 Crawfordsville Road, Indianapolis, Indiana, and was scheduled to work from 10 p.m. to closing on November 17th, 1978. Redacted stated that on the evening of November 17th, 1978, he had automobile trouble and called the assistant manager at Burger Chef and reported that his car battery was dead. Redacted advised he first called Burger Chef at 9:35 p.m. Redacted stated he made a second call to the Burger Chef restaurant at approximately 11:30 p.m. and informed Jane Freet that his battery was repaired and inquired if he was to report to work. Redacted advised he talked to the assistant manager, Jane Freet, on both occasions. Redacted stated that when he made the second call, Jane told him to report to Burger Chef to help clean up. Redacted advised Jane's voice did not sound strange in any way. Redacted stated he left Redacted at approximately 11:30 p.m. on November 17th, 1978, and arrived at the Burger Chef restaurant at approximately 12 midnight. Redacted advised as he pulled into the Burger Chef parking lot, he observed Dan's car and Kring's car parked near the restaurant. Redacted advised he parked next to Kring's car, and as he, Redacted, got out of his vehicle, saw Kring running out the rear door of the Burger Chef restaurant. Kring made the statement that the door was open and nobody was inside. Redacted advised he accompanied Kring inside and was also told by Kring that there was no money left in the restaurant. Redacted advised that when he entered the restaurant, he observed that normal cleaning procedure had been started, but the floors were still dirty, and the broiler had not been cleaned. Redacted also stated he observed loose change lying on the floor and both compartments to the safe were open. Redacted stated that the cash register doors were closed and there were no apparent signs of a struggle. Redacted further stated he did observe the assistant manager's purse still in the office. Redacted advised he knew of no problem between the employees and stated all the employees worked as one big happy family. Redacted advised he last worked Thursday evening, November 16th, 1978, from 8 p.m. to midnight. Redacted stated he does not recall any strange type customers entering the Burger Chef on Thursday evening. Okay. One thing people may be wondering, if we've talked to this redacted person before, does that line up with what he told us?
That sounds very similar to what he told us.
Okay.
There are some details that I don't want to get into until after we talk with him again. And I will note, for what it's worth, I think it's odd that if he's supposed to work 10 to 12 and he calls in at 11:30 and says, I can come now, and I'll get there right around midnight, which is when I'm scheduled to go off work. It seems odd that she would tell him to go ahead and go in.
Right. I guess if you're arguing like, oh, he missed a bunch of stuff, so he needs to make up for it. I don't know. The whole thing is a bit weird.
Now, we do know that he says in there he calls in around 9:35 and says he can't come to work. Now, we do know that that call must have happened, and I'll tell you how we know that. Because the family of victim Dan Davis recalls that Dan Davis was scheduled to get off work at 10 p.m. that night. And if Dan Davis had gotten off work at 10 p.m. that night, of course, he would have lived. But he calls home a little before 10 and says somebody was supposed to come in and is not going to come in. So I have a chance to work a couple of extra hours, make a little bit of extra money, help me save up some money for Christmas gifts.
Yeah, it's always one of the more heartbreaking details.
And so his parents give him special permission to stay and work those 2 hours that this individual was scheduled to work and didn't show up for. So that call at least was made. So it's interesting that he would show up just when he did and leave so abruptly.
Yeah, and we're certainly not trying to point at anybody. We just want clarification.
Yes.
Because, I mean, I think at this point, it would be great to clarify some things.
So we are going to continue to try to reach out to him and hopefully persuade him to come on and share his story with us all.
Yeah, the more that we can get clarified, the more we can get on the record, the more we can kind of rule certain things out and move on to other things.
And there's plenty of other interesting things, even in these files themselves. There's some stuff about potential racial issues I find very interesting.
Yes, and different dynamics between employees, issues that different employees may have had going on in their personal lives leading up to this horrible situation. And I mean, we're going to just basically go through this with a fine-tooth comb over time and single out different issues, peel them out, and talk with you about them. And it's one of those cases that if you have thoughts, we want to hear from you. So let us know what you think or what you make of any of this. And especially with the car moving around, because we just can't get our heads around that. Before we go, I do want to shout out some people. When we first got these files, we were trying very hard to re-interview a number of people in the case because, new information came out or we wanted to kind of go over some discrepancies. And so as a result of that, we were trying to keep it really quiet that these had to come out. And naturally, obviously, Facebook knew about it immediately. So we have some people to thank and apologize to because we either declined their posts or deleted their post in an effort to try to not give the jump to people who we wanted to re-interview. So we want to definitely thank Hank. He's one of our sources from this show. We previously interviewed him on a previous episode. We previously interviewed him about his takes. He's followed this case really closely. We always appreciate his insights. We declined his post. We're sorry. It was a good post. We just didn't want anyone to know about this. We also want to thank Jordan, who's with Veritas Investigative Services. He also had an early post saying, hey, this is interesting. We declined it. Nothing personal. And we really appreciate their discretion. There was also a gentleman in the Justice for the Speedway Burger Chef group whose post we deleted. Again, apologies. Feel free to repost now. We just wanted to have a bit of time to get people on the record before we started publicizing this widely. And we hope you understand. Again, apologies and thanks for the discretion.
Thanks so much for listening to the Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.